For years, fans have speculated that Sans traveled from the Deltarune universe over to Undertale. And now with the release of Deltarune Chapter 4, we finally have all the pieces we need to start connecting the dots. From subtle dialogue to reused songs, today we're analyzing all the evidence, old and new, to piece together Sans' origin story. At the end of Deltarune Chapter 4, a song titled The Place Where It Rained begins playing, a not so subtle nod to the Undertale track, It's Raining Somewhere Else, which plays when Sans has his endgame check-in with Frisk. By taking the song titles literally, one might assume these two events occur at the same time. After all, Deltarune and Undertale are parallel universes. However, I want to propose a different idea by analyzing when these songs are played. In Undertale, It's Raining Somewhere Else serves as the emotional backdrop to Sans' conversation with Frisk, where he implies some very interesting tidbits about his history. Your journey's almost over, huh? You must really want to go home. Hey, I know the feeling, buddo. While it's easy to assume Sans means returning to the surface, the goal of every other monster in the game, he clarifies himself during his battle in the genocide route. Look, I gave up trying to go back a long time ago, and getting to the surface doesn't really appeal anymore either. Sans makes it well known that he longs for a home he can return to, and that's not the surface world, it's somewhere else entirely. So then, where was he trying to return to? As of Deltarune Chapter 4, we finally have our answer. The Place Where It Rained plays right before Chris and Susie find Sans and Toriel boogieing together. What's interesting about this song is that it removes the Sans motif altogether. Here's a side-by-side comparison. My interpretation is that Sans is reminiscing about his night with Toriel when he's speaking to Frisk, and because it's a memory he can't go back to, it resonates with him emotionally, hence the Sans motif being present in It's Raining Somewhere Else. Whereas in Deltarune, the moment is still fresh with Sans because it's happening in real time, when he hasn't lost anything yet. Therefore, that night doesn't carry the emotional weight that it does in Undertale, which is why the motif is missing in The Place Where It Rained. One other detail I wanted to mention is the flow of the conversation. Notice how it naturally leads into discussing Toriel and the promise he made her, because he's thinking about the night he spent with the Deltarune version of her. A closer look at the night in question gives us even more details about Sans' history. This scene caused a lot of controversy because fans felt that Sans was acting out of character. He's shamelessly dancing with a drunken Toriel in front of Chris and Susie despite them expressing discomfort. Even after Toriel recognizes something was off with Susie, Sans quickly brushes it off and turns the music back on. So was this really a break from his character? Personally, I don't think so. While Sans is a nonchalant prankster in both games, the one we know from Undertale is depressed, disguising his apathy to everyone, including his own brother, as laziness. He's aware of the endless game resets the player puts everyone through, and he already lost all hope of escaping back to Deltarune. You can feel that pain the most during the true pacifist battle against Azrael. When Frisk reaches out to Sans' soul, he responds with, "Just give up, why even try? You'll never see him again." Unlike the other characters, this text doesn't use Sans' dialogue sounds, nor does it use a standard font like Papyrus. It's just pure grief, expressed visually through the floating letters. So he doesn't really see a point in actively involving himself in Undertale's affairs because, in his own words, it's just going to be reset. But in Deltarune, Sans does actively involve himself because he hasn't lost anything yet. He still has motivations and ambitions. Now yes, in Undertale, he's very popular at Grillby's, and the regulars love his non-stop appearances, but there's a key difference in tone. He's settling. He still goes out, but it's like he's clinging to a routine because it's all he has left. One monster even tells us that despite his vast knowledge of food, he always ends up ordering the same burger, likely out of comfort. In Deltarune, however, we see a version of Sans that's building a life for himself with actual passion, whether it's cracking jokes with Toriel or running a grocery store. So I don't think it's fair to say that he's acting out of character here because this Sans is still new to us. For all we know, Sans just simply used to be a more selfish person, prioritizing his own amusement despite how others might feel. There's really not much else to support this claim, but if we are to believe Sans is from Deltarune, we're seeing an earlier version of his life here, an emotional predecessor to the one we met in Undertale, and not a literal parallel counterpart like Asgore for instance. So in Undertale, we interact with the Sans that already changed, who's taken what's given to him in the underground, the same advice he gives to Frisk. But that's just one way to look at it. Let's rewind and take a look at a second interpretation. What if Sans already had an idea that Toriel was in danger? We know that, for whatever reason, the Knight wants Toriel, and Toriel was supposed to be at the church for choir practice that day, where the Knight opened the Dark Fountain, but thanks to the storm, and how fun Mr. Sans was, she cancelled choir practice and got drunk with him instead. It's possible that Sans brought Toriel back home because he knew she would be safe and distracted there with him, instead of wondering where Chris and Susie are on a stormy night. But how would Sans have obtained this insider knowledge? Through his long-known connection to W.D. Gaster, who's largely believed to be pulling the strings behind the Deltarune universe itself. Which, by the way, while we're on the topic of W.D. Gaster, I did actually do a separate video on him, so if you wanted to show me just a little bit of support, I would very much so appreciate it if you watched that video as well. Thank you very much. Starting with the basics, Sans and Gaster are both skeletons whose dialogue are written in unique fonts. Gaster was the first royal scientist, while Sans is heavily implied to be a quantum physicist, based on the books in his house, his secret workshop, and the inexplicable nature of his bedroom. Papyrus gives us even more insight into this. If you call him while standing in Dr. Alfie's lab, he says, "A lab? My brother would love that. He loves science fiction, especially when it's real." And have you ever noticed how the door to Sans's bedroom shares the exact same sprite as the warp doors in each of Deltarune's Dark Worlds? Toby Fox isn't just reusing assets, he's making a connection, but the similarities don't stop there. When you first enter Sans's room, you're met with infinite darkness, eerily similar to the void that appears when Chris and Susie first enter the supply closet in Deltarune. Eventually, Papyrus turns on the light, revealing that you were just walking on a treadmill the whole time. But here's the kicker. He casually asks if Sans pranked you across time and space, because apparently he does that. So it seems like someone's been experimenting with Dark Worlds. You know who else has a history of messing with Dark Worlds? Gaster, as evident in entry number 17. Dark. Darker yet darker. The darkness keeps growing, the shadows cutting deeper, photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? We can assume Sans was one of the people involved with these Dark World experiments, and if these connections to Gaster still aren't enough to convince you, we have this little weapon that Sans wields in his boss fight. The name of it is never mentioned in game, but it's called the Gaster Blaster in Undertale's files. So for someone with a history of Dark World shenanigans and a relationship to the big man behind the scenes, is it really that much of a stretch to believe Sans knows what's really going on in Deltarune? Not just having the knowledge to protect Toriel, but maybe even a full understanding of the prophecy, which tells of a world-ending event if too many dark fountains exist at one time. So here Sans is, posing as a humble shopkeeper, all the while living under constant threat of the apocalypse. Not to mention, there's also Papyrus to consider. In Undertale, we know Sans is fiercely protective of his brother, even feeding into Papyrus' childlike worldview. He doesn't just read him bedtime stories, he nudges people to play along with his puzzles and even praises them for lying to make him feel good, whether it's about a spaghetti or even which word game is harder. And if you play the genocide route, Sans outright threatens you right before you battle Papyrus. It's almost like he's sheltering him mentally. So in Deltarune, maybe Sans is sheltering him physically at home. Not only would this explain why Papyrus is so naive with a thirst for social validation, but it would also protect him while Sans plans out their escape before Doomsday. That escape plan being the broken machine we find in his workshop. We can assume he built this so that he and Papyrus can switch universes before the Roaring takes place. Toby tweeted about this machine in 2015. You've seen all the happiest outcomes. Neither of them could fix the machine, no matter how hard they tried. No one can. This is why Sans can't go home, why he accepted never seeing them again. This could also explain why he takes Toriel's promise so seriously and why he watches over Frisk. He never learned the fate of Deltarune Toriel, and maybe he feels guilty that he can't go back and save her, so this is his way of honoring her legacy. All of this suggests that we're not just seeing a familiar character in a new story, we've been seeing his story unfold in reverse the whole time. But let's stop for a second and recap because that was a decade's worth of information we just went through. In Deltarune, Sans is a shopkeeper by day, scientist by night, having been involved with Dark World experimentation and whatever other weird things Gaster is into. Either out of selfishness or care, he ultimately protects Toriel from the night during Chapter 4. But his knowledge of how dangerous the Deltarune universe is ultimately motivates him to build a machine capable of traveling across space and time. So during some unseen event, one that likely takes place later on or after Deltarune, Sans and Papyrus jump ship over to Undertale, where the machine fell into disrepair, and with it, any chance of going back. Burdened by his harsh reality, Sans regresses into a cycle of apathy, with his only motivations being to watch over Papyrus and to honor a friend he lost in a different life. Sounds simple enough, right? That's more or less the broader story we're able to piece together with the information we have. But there's still even more clues that indicate Sans is quite literally out of this world. The first few hints can be found in Sans' workshop. Notably, the music playing is a distorted and really melancholic version of It's Raining Somewhere Else, a symbolic representation of the broken dream Sans has to return to Deltarune. Now outside of the broken machine we already discussed, there's a lot of neat little possessions to look at. What stands out the most is a poorly drawn picture of 3 smiling people. Written on it, "Don't forget." It's speculated that these 3 people are Chris, Susie, and Rousey, who may become closer to Sans in future Deltarune chapters, and, of course, "Don't forget" has served as the main theme of Deltarune since Chapter 1. But what's most interesting is that this specific message will only appear if the player has a fun value between 80 and 89, in which case they would meet Clam Girl, who talks about her neighbor's daughter Susie. If the player did not meet Clam Girl, they would instead find a photo album of people that Frisk doesn't recognize alongside Sans, who looks happy. These people are likely Deltarune inhabitants that don't have a direct counterpart in Undertale. Lastly, there's a set of blueprints for the broken machine that Frisk can't read the symbols on, or perhaps the handwriting is too illegible. This hints at Gaster, of course, who literally speaks in symbols, but also Dr. Alphys, who we know has bad handwriting. Maybe Alphys was the other person Gaster referenced in entry number 17, and the other person Toby referenced in his tweet. It kind of makes me think Sans explained the situation to the Undertale version of Alphys, and neither of them could get the machine running again. They were secretly friends after all, to the point that Papyrus was shocked that they even knew each other. If you call Papyrus a second time in Alphys' lab, he'll remember seeing the bag of dog food in Sans' room, implying that he's been sending them to feed the amalgamate experiments. It looks like Sans and Alphys trusted each other with their darkest secrets. Outside of Sans' lab, the Snowdin Shopkeeper also shares very suspicious information about them. She says if you're bored, you can sit outside and watch those wacky skeletons do their thing. There's 2 of them, brothers I think. They just showed up one day and asserted themselves. Based on what we know, this is literally true. When it's Sans' turn to give Frisk a puzzle, he gives them an Icy branded word search. Icy is not referenced anywhere else in Undertale. In Deltarune, however, Icy is a very well-known brand, complete with a pizzeria right in hometown. So it's likely that word search was a relic Sans brought over from the Deltarune universe. There was also a blog interview hosted by Toby, where Papyrus starts to describe his life before Snowdin, mentioning green and grass, before Sans interrupts and abruptly ends the interview. The obvious takeaway is that Sans doesn't want people learning where they came from, but this could also be another example of him mentally sheltering his brother from the truth. In Deltarune Chapter 4, we actually see Sans teleport, jumping from the front of his shop to the screen above. At first, I thought it was just a visual gag, until I remembered how often Sans loved popping up out of nowhere in Undertale, not to mention those shortcuts he took Frisk on. Now, most Deltarune characters keep their Undertale personalities, but not their abilities. Asgore still gardens and plants for Toriel, but we haven't seen him use his trident or fire magic. The one clear exception is Undyne, who uses her spears, but only in a dark world, where everyday items transform into fantastical weapons. Sans, on the other hand, he's teleporting in the light world, the real world, just like he does in Undertale. Why would he be the exception? Unless this isn't just an alternate version of Sans, but the very same one. Lastly, at the end of Chapter 4, we see Susie bleed after she shatters the final prophecy. Susie originates from the Deltarune universe. The only other monster we've ever explicitly seen bleed is Sans at the end of the genocide route. Now I'm not saying there's a hard rule that Deltarune monsters can bleed and Undertale ones can't, but I think it's pretty intentional that Sans is the only other monster we've ever seen bleed, hinting at his true origins all along. It's absolutely incredible how Toby has slowly revealed Sans' backstory right under our noses this past decade. And with the new information we got from Deltarune Chapter 4, I think it's more likely than ever that Sans did not originate from the Undertale universe. However, there's still many questions that we'll hopefully get answers to in future chapters. What's Papyrus up to, and why does it seem like he can't remember his past life in Undertale? What's the nature of Sans' relationship to Gaster? Why did Sans become a judge of character? Why doesn't Papyrus know what the sun looks like? And who are the 3 people drawn in Sans' lab? While we wait on the rest of the missing pieces to assemble a complete puzzle, the most we can do is hope that he takes what he can get with Papyrus and Undertale's true pacifist ending. Let me know what you think the future holds for Sans and Papyrus as Deltarune continues to unfold. That being said, have a good one.